Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. It is May 21st, 2020.
That's
the worst year of our life.
Yeah.
My name is Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. And today we got probably the most interesting show of the whole year for literally nobody.
I mean, unless you're trying to start a league.
Unless you're trying to start a fantasy league.
Yeah.
Is it okay to sit? I don't even know what you want to call this. I feel like it's Native American style. I don't want to say anything to offend anyone. In your office chair, is that like a real thing? Do people do that?
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, like cross-legged.
Yeah, dude. There you go. That's a more politically correct way of stating it.
You can do that, sure.
It has no arms and literally no back.
Anybody would call you out, even though it could be like a little childish, but that's okay.
I only say that because if you're watching on YouTube, I moved my leg. It kind of might.
Just do what you want, dog.
Anyway,
do what you want.
Today we're going to talk about our basically our top 10 rule changes for your fantasy leagues in 2020, or rule changes that maybe you should consider for your fantasy league. Before we do that and break down exactly what we're going to be talking about and the structure of how we're going to talk about it, be sure to check out our website at thefantasychampions.com. Check out Adam Hutchison's article. And don't forget, we are still looking for writers. I'll say that every week until you guys apply or whatever. Our team's
filled up.
Yeah. Follow us on Twitter at the FF Champs, on Instagram at the Fantasy Champions. Like us at facebook.com/the Fantasy Champions. Subscribe wherever you listen: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, and click the bell on YouTube for notifications. Leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. So let's do the rule changes. What do you say? What do you say?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Fastest intro of my life.
Yeah.
I said that like 4 weeks ago, I think. So we're going to do this in a question format, if that makes sense. So it'll be a dialogue, but these are rule changes that maybe you can consider and what we think you should do with your league in 2020. Our opinions on different things. So we've been in just about every league, and we can advise you on what you should do for your league this year. If you're starting a league, these questions apply. If you're in the middle of a family league that you've been running for 25 years and Jim is just holding on to the kicker position so hard, we'll give you advice on that. So let's just start with the very first rule change. Maybe not a rule change. Maybe you already have your team or your league already has this format. But what is the best format for point scoring? Is it PPR, points per reception, half PPR, which is a half point per reception in case you didn't catch the drift, or standard, which is no fantasy points for receptions? It's all based on yards and touchdowns. So go. Which one do you think is best?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these questions is going to be preference for us personally and for me.
Yeah.
We played standard for a lot of years. That was always, because when I started playing fantasy football, most people I think did standard. It was kind of. It was at least
standard is called standard because it's the standard.
It was a standard on Yahoo, standard on ESPN, standard on NFL.com. But over the years of playing fantasy football, PPR has kind of taken the fantasy world by storm. There's a lot of people that do PPR now. I think that is probably the more standard. Mm-hmm. And I remember you were hesitant to switch to PPR, and some people in our league wanted to do PPR, so you found half PPR. Mm-hmm. And half PPR, I think, is a good happy medium, because I think a player should get rewarded for getting a catch, right? And I think you agree with that.
Yeah.
A full point, if a guy like a Julian Edelman type player who gets 10 catches and for like 70 yards, but still has a monster fantasy game, is like kind of like, that doesn't feel right either. Yeah. So I think half PPR is a good happy medium. It's kind of the perfect mix between standard and PPR. But if you want to do PPR, I think that's fine. If you want to do standard, I think that's fine. It all depends on your view. But for us personally, I think we both like half PPR.
Yeah. So I mean, everything you said, I totally agree with. For me, I was the one hesitant on switching from standard to PPR full. I remember in our league's history, there was, I think it was my brother that brought up the PPR thing, and he started a separate league against me.
A revolt.
No one played it. Well, they participated, but they didn't.
We
didn't actually follow along.
Yeah.
So anyway, but when I heard about half PPR, I was kind of like, this seems a little bit better. It's like a happy medium. I'm an idiot because I actually really like PPR now, but the thing I mostly like about half PPR is that in full PPR leagues, it's much more difficult. Like the wide receiver position is so much more value. And the idea of, having a, PPR fantasy league is to make the wide receiver position more valuable, right? Because running backs are king in standard leagues. Like if you have a really good running back, you don't really need a great wide receiver. I mean, you do need great wide receivers, but the running back position is probably the most important on a fantasy team in a standard league.
Sure.
In PPR, that switches. If you're in a PPR mock draft or in a draft in general, you can justifiably get away with drafting 2 wide receivers first and waiting on running backs later because the wide receiver position is way more valuable.
Yep.
So the goal of PPR when people first started it was to even out the position of wide receiver and running back, and it kind of just overcompensated a little bit. And some other things that we'll talk about a little bit later are overcompensations, I think. But I think for half PPR, it's a perfect medium. It makes the wide receiver and the running back position equally as important. So if you want to draft a wide receiver in the first round, you can get away with it. But I think it's the compromise of the two, but I think it actually makes the wide receiver position and the running back position more even. But it also brings, you have a whole statistical column that in standard league just wasn't being followed, right? And it's like receptions are a thing. Receptions should count. The little hesitant. I don't know if there's people out there that were like me 5 years ago that were a little hesitant on the PPR front, just because of for me it was the fact that A, it was overcompensating, and B, I felt like you would have running backs or wide receivers who would be terrible after the catch, who have ridiculous seasons because of the PPR situation. You know what I mean? They get like 3 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards a catch, which is, minimal. And they're not really that great, but they get like 75 to 100 catches, and all of a sudden they have, 175, 200 fantasy points. They're in the top 10 in PPR just because they had all those receptions, So I don't have anything against PPR. I really like PPR. It's a different format. It's a different way of thinking, but I think half PPR makes it more even. You probably agree with all of that.
Yeah, I definitely do. I don't mind. I mean, if I had a second choice, I'd probably rather do PPR than standard. Honestly, standard's last for me.
Yeah,
at this point
it is now.
Yeah, but half PPR is definitely, I think, the way to go for at least us, in our opinion.
Okay, let's talk about the waiver wire situation, because I think there's a lot of people in the world who don't do waivers properly. For the sake of agreeing for like the fifth, we're probably going to agree for the first 6 of these, but anyway. So usually, if you drop yourself into one of those standard leagues, usually what you have is a reverse. I think it's called a. I'm not going to call it by the wrong thing, but you have just a general waiver system where, on Tuesday or Wednesday, your league basically puts through all the waivers, and you not randomly, but by, worst to first, get a certain player that's on the waiver wire. There's big problems for that for me, because I don't like putting it up to chance that somebody else is going to get them. In terms of, if there's a team, if you're like the best team in the league and you throw in a waiver wire ad for somebody, and then somebody who's worse than you just automatically gets them, that's stupid. But so for me personally, I like to use waiver budgets. And if you don't know what FOB is, you don't know what a waiver budget is, it's basically a set amount of, dollars, fake money that you get to put a player on your team, essentially.
Free agents.
Yeah, essentially. So basically you would, I prefer there is a free agent system where you bid on free agents and then it clears every day or something like that. But anyway, waiver budget is a little bit better because it follows that waiver system where, it's not just free for all. Everyone goes out and grabs players. You have to wait until Wednesday for it to go through. But basically you get, for example, I think our league is like $200 for the whole season, which I think is pretty standard, but you can set it however you want, but you get a specific amount. Let's just, for the sake of this discussion, say $200. You get $200 to start the season, and then throughout the course of the entire season, every time you put in a waiver budget and you bid a specific amount, you lose that money. So that cost will go down. If you run out, you have no more buying power on the waiver wire. So you can choose week 1 to put $200 down on one player. That wouldn't be wise of you to do, but you can do that. But anyway, so basically what this system does is gives you an opportunity to outbid people. Once you know your league mates, you know how much they're going to bid on a player. What's going on. It is blind bidding. So you're not going to be like, okay, John has this many guys on his team and, he put $25 on this guy. He's not going to tell you what it is unless he wants to, which would be stupid as well. But anyway, so, your goal is to outbid other people on, the waiver wire to get the player. I like it because it gives you the opportunity to control if you get the player or not. So even if you're the best team in the league and you have, $150 in waiver budget and somebody you really like comes on the waiver wire, you can say, $75 bid on that guy, and you're going to get him. So it's like, it gives you more of an opportunity to, have more power on the waiver wire than just, closing your eyes and hoping Tuesday, Wednesday morning that you got a guy based off your position on the waiver wire.
Yeah. I mean, I like the waiver budget too over the classic old school, waiver priority. Mm-hmm. Partly because if you're the worst team in the league, you would always get the guy you wanted, no matter what. And
then you'd have the worst team in the league blocking people.
Yeah. And you can do, you can still do that with money, but you only can get blocked if you did something stupid beforehand. It adds another layer, I think, to the game, and you have to be cautious of your money, but at the same time, not be afraid to use it. I like the waiver budget. I mean, and some crazy things happens with it too. Remember in our league last year, somebody was saving his waiver budget all $200 all year. We're like, what is he doing?
What is he doing?
And then he spent all 200 of it on Wayne Gallum when Barkley got hurt. You remember that?
Yep.
And
didn't Gallman get hurt too?
Gallman got hurt, yeah. After 1 week.
He was so pissed.
But you can do that sort of thing if you want. Yeah. And I remember a few years ago when Kareem Hunt, what was it, Kareem Hunt? No, it was when Nick Chubb, whoever the Browns starting running back was, I think Carlos Hyde got traded.
Don't do it to me.
Yeah, well, when Carlos Hyde got traded and Nick Chubb became the starter, he was on the waiver wire, I think, in our league. Yeah. And you picked him up in a half second after Adam Schefter tweeted the news, and we're like, what the heck? But if it was, we could have bid money on that at the time when we were doing waiver budget, because we only started doing waiver budget last year.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it adds another layer to the game, and I really like it.
Okay.
I don't mind having $200, $300. That really doesn't matter.
Yeah. It changes if you decide to do more, it just changes the value of what you have. You know what I mean?
This is fake money.
Right. So it's if you do $400, if you do $500, it just means, for me, this is why when we talk, during the regular season, when we talk about waiver wire, we talk about percentages of how much you should use to bid. You know what I mean? So even if you're, for us, we have 200. So if we say, 20% of that, we put down 20% on the player. If you have 400 and we still say 20%, then you put 20% of the 400. Having more doesn't really give you more. It changes the value of what a waiver wire guy might cost, really, at that point. So, I mean, I would just stick with 200. There's no real reason to do that. But I wanted to give some tips for the waiver wire budget really fast.
Sure.
The one thing, so I'll say two things really fast. I don't know if you have anything, but I'll just say two things. The first one is, if you're bidding on the waiver wire, don't ever bid what you think somebody else would bid. And what I mean by that is that a normal person's going to go, okay, I'm going to bid $20, right? Or I'm going to bid $25, or I'm going to bid 30, right? They'll come up with a flat number and bid it. Bid a wacko weird number. So if you think he's worth $25, bid 27.
Yeah.
Because the guy who puts 25 down, it's not, the reason why it's a waiver budget is that if you tie, the worst placed team gets him. If that makes sense. If you both bid 25, the team with the lower seed basically gets the player, which
That's the
sucks.
tiebreaker, yeah.
So what you want to do is bid a little bit more than you think somebody would. So what I was doing is bidding like $27, $28 or something like that.
I was doing that the whole year too.
Yeah, just to get people, because people will go in your league and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm going to bid $20,
$20,
and I'll try to snipe people at 21."
Right.
So that's the first thing, and then the second thing is I try to use a lot of my waiver wire budget in the first 4 weeks of the season. This is a preference thing, but when has there ever, besides somebody getting stupid and dropping a player like you did with Nick Chubb 2 years ago, unless they get stupid and they start dropping players, when is there a guy that turns out to be a high-level player come off the waiver wire? Usually within the first 4 weeks of the season. So I like to don't spend it all, but a lot of the main idea with waiver budget that a lot of people have going in is that, I should just save my waiver budget all the way until the end of the season. And then they're like,
really probably won't need it.
Yeah, and then at that point you don't need it. I had $71 in waiver budget left last year, so what did I do? I put $71 on Jimmy Garoppolo so I'd win my playoff game. I lost, but it was worth it. But anyway, so it's like I don't see the need to keep your waiver wire budget. It doesn't really, like, you can bid 0 on a guy and still get him. It doesn't really, like, if you need to add players, you're not stuck. It's not like you can't add players if you don't have any budget left. You can. That's one of the things that I was debunked on a couple years ago when I first started with waiver budget. But anyway, so yeah, I would try to spend a lot of it, at least 75%. 60 to 75% of your waiver budget within the first 4 weeks of the season, because that's when you're going to get the breakout players. So those are my two things.
No, I agree with that. The only time you'll ever see a breakout player available in the open market after week 4 is if somebody gets injured or if somebody gets traded.
That's why you want to keep at least a little bit, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, I overall agree with the premise, because usually you'll see the breakout players in week 2, week 3.
Yeah. So I'll sometimes people like to, it depends. Like I said, it's preference. That's just my suggestion. You can do it however you want, but for me, I think that's a good strategy to live by. Like for me last year, I said, I'm going to spend 50% in 2 weeks, and I overspent on Dak Prescott, but,
but it was
right. It was worth it. Somebody put $10 in and I spent $50, and I was like, dang it. That's one of the worst parts about waiver budget is when you look Wednesday morning and you're going to have a bid that's higher than everyone else, but you don't know how much everyone else is going to bid. And then when you find out Wednesday morning that you were either A, the only person that bid, and you're like, I wasted all that money, or B, that everyone else bid like $12 and you bid like $50. Now you look like an idiot because you wasted all your money on a player no one else was going to get. But anyway, let's move on to number 3. This is a hot topic for a lot of people. Somebody in our league got really pissed last year because they joined it for the first time, didn't check the rules, didn't know there was no vetoing in our league, and got really pissed. But basically, the question is, should you allow vetoes?
This one has a history in our league.
Yeah.
It has almost caused car crashes. It's almost caused deaths.
I'll just say,
burning of cities.
I'll say right now, like, don't allow certain things in your fantasy league. This is just a tip. Don't allow certain things in your fantasy league to like completely destroy friendships, because it's just fantasy football.
Yeah.
If you're in a high stakes league and you spent $2,000 on this thing and somebody wants to veto your trade, then yeah, car crashes and destroying the league is fine. But like if you're in your home league or you're in your family league and people are just getting mad at each other, and
that should be a rule of thumb for any.
Yeah,
it's
most fantasy football. When high stakes is like 2,000 or more. Or maybe even I'll say 1,000 and more. But like, if you're just if you're playing regular fantasy football and the buy-in was $75, like let's relax a little bit. It's just for fun, dude.
Exactly. Yeah. But the veto, here's my opinion on it. A lot of people have different views on it. This is just kind of like my opinion based on personal experience.
Yeah.
Which is no veto. I don't like the veto.
Okay.
I think if two parties agree to the trade, then
no veto.
It's just you should allow the trade. And if you get mad because the best team in the league got another good player, then you should be doing everything you can do to counter that and get a move yourself.
Yeah.
I don't like. I overall don't like the veto. I don't like that other players can control. Like can say yes, you can do this trade, or no, you can do this trade. That it completely aren't involved, because obviously if you're the second best team in the league and you're the best team in the league, and the second, third, and fourth teams in the league that are right behind you see that you just traded for, insert good player here, like traded for Aaron Jones or Derrick Henry, a good running back. Then they're obviously going to be like, no, don't do it. I'm not allowing that, and veto it. And then the next day they go out and trade for the same player. Yeah. The same thing that you were offering. And you're like,
so the day, we had massive discussions. I remember the year after the whole veto situation, because the trade got vetoed in our league that caused the car crashes and the problems. But anyway, so basically, like, the premise is I was on the side of keeping vetoes because people should be able to vote if there's, but I was an idiot back then. I was stupid. But anyway, so back, I guess, on the side of what a lot of people think, on vetoes when they prefer them, it's that, you want the league fairness level to stay at a certain height. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want people to, if you have a super team, if they keep making trades, and they get better and better and better, and somebody else swoops in and says, I'm probably not going to make the playoffs, I'll just trade you this guy for nothing. And like, that's, you know what I mean? Just having the ability to say, hey, let's veto the trade always was a good idea for me. So I've seen it on both sides, but I think that's just I think it's honestly a veto, and calling for a veto is just being a poor sport. You know what I mean? Because you're playing a game that requires trading and requires doing different things. And if you're jumping in and saying, nah, we need to veto that because that person doesn't deserve that trade. You know what I mean? The goal of it is to keep it fair. But the reality is it makes things unfair when everyone decides whether or not you get to do that. You know what I mean? So anyway, I think I agree with you. It should be, you should be able to not vote on the veto, if that makes any sense. Here's what here is what you should do. No vetoes, but keep it active so that if there is a situation where there was collusion in some way. So at the end of the season, a certain guy in your league doesn't make the playoffs and he knows it, and he says, you know what, I'm rooting for this person to beat this person because the most hated person in the league's got a dominating team. So they trade all their good players for basically chicken scrap at the end of the season to that one person. That, in my opinion, would be collusion. So you would call your commissioner out essentially and say, hey, I saw collusion, or I think there's collusion. And then the commissioner, hopefully they're non-binary, so they're not going to be like, they're unbiased, I should say, but they're not going to be, biased in a situation when it comes to investigating somebody. But anyway, so you sit there, you investigate the situation, figure out if it was collusion. What I like to do is have the league take a vote on the collusion after the evidence has been presented.
The law of court.
Right, basically. Well, I don't want it to be, my big thing is, as a commissioner, I don't want it to be up to me. Because so many people get mad at you, and it's like, I'm not, when you make a decision on collusion, you're not trying to do it for the sake of yourself. You're trying to do it for the sake of the league so it doesn't completely collapse because people get pissed. So it's like, I just want to, I put it up to everyone. So if they think it's collusion, then the trade gets vetoed. But it's only collusion that ever brings the veto out.
Collusion, or if somebody like accidentally.
Oh, yeah. We like to keep it on so that if somebody is an idiot and they just accidentally accepted it while they're driving in their car, don't use it front wheel driving. But anyway, don't do vetoes. It just causes strife.
Yep.
So let's move on to number 4. Extra bench spots. This is something that I did in our league last year, and I thought it was very, very well used.
Yep.
Most formats usually have 15 rounds. I believe, in your draft, which ends up being how many bench spots?
6.
You have 9 starters, 14, 15. I don't know.
6.
Anyway, so I like to add extra bench spots in any league that I start because I feel like it causes more competition on the waiver wire, which I think is fun. And I think it also allows you to take deeper dives on the waiver wire on certain players, and scout a little bit more. So it gives you a little more in-depth analysis as opposed to, like there are some leagues where certain players that are on the waiver wire, you're just like, how are they even there? Like they should be on a team. So it makes the waiver wire super thin, which makes it tougher to stream, tougher to do a lot of things. And I like that. It gives it a little bit of extra dimension. You know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on extra bench spots?
Oh, I love it. As you said, I think it gives more competition in the waiver wire.
More for me to steal people away from somebody else just to win a week.
If you're in a smaller league, like our home league where it's 10 team too, there's a lot of good players that are available. So I think having an extra bench spot definitely helps with that, because there's players like you said on the waiver wire that's like, why are they on the waiver wire? Like, and I could use another bench player, and like I just think it's much better. Your teams can be much deeper because of it. I love the extra bench spot. I don't know why we didn't do it in the past.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean it's definitely like if you have a 5 bench spots versus 6, right? Because isn't that what it usually is?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Typically you'll always miss out on people too that you want, and you're like, I should pick them up, but then I have to drop
that's the worst. Yeah, and then you want to hold on to the guys you have, and you don't have that extra bench spot.
It causes a whole mess. I just like having the extra bench spot.
Yeah, me too. Number 5. This is it's not a hot debate, because I feel like there's honestly some unspoken of tension between the two different communities in redraft and dynasty. So I was going to ask you, should you switch to dynasty? Because go ahead.
Just for me personally, I think if you have the time and you really want to put a lot of effort into it, and everybody in the league agrees that they want to do this for years, and they're committed to it, and they're all going to put a significant amount of effort.
It's the hardest part to find in Dynasty's commitment.
Yeah, I think then it's fine to switch to a dynasty league.
Yeah.
But if you're in a more casual setting and everybody's working all the time, but you still wanted to play fantasy football and you still want to be in a league, don't do dynasty. Yeah. It's too much. It's too much effort for paying attention to college football. It's too much effort for, I mean, I know some dynasty leagues just do have the same format. But then some dynasty leagues are also like individual defensive players as well. So
it's like, and some dynasty leagues have, what is it called? Oh man, I'm so mad.
Some dynasty. What are you referring to?
I'm trying to in the NFL. Okay, I got it. Never mind. They have a salary cap, so you have to pay your players. I was trying to find salary cap in my small little brain.
See, that's kind of cool, but at the same time,
it's so difficult. I'm in a league with the salary cap. It's you have to sit there and think about it, but it's kind of stupid because it's like, it only applies to really high level players. So like it only really applies when you're making trades. But anyway, I think if you're doing a basic dynasty league, it is more complex. I thought about it for our home league, but there's a lot of people that would have to follow along to multiple, like you don't even need to follow college football all off season or all regular season, and watch on Saturdays to know what's going on with players, because a lot of the times it's going to be evaluating and seeing what the fit is for each player. It's not really going to be how they performed in college football. Like that has an aspect to it. And, the combine has an aspect, the different games that they play, like all that stuff. Like the entire scouting process, that all has its place. But the reality is that for fantasy football, it all really matters based on landing spot. That's about it. There are rankings for dynasty that I see all the time that come out right before the draft, and then after the draft, totally different just because of landing spots. So anyway, scouting is not a problem, and it's not that like hard to do. It's just, it does take effort and work and time to be able to invest into the Dynasty League. And it's all off season. You know what I mean? It's not just, it's not like redraft where you draft in August, you play all season. And then if, January, you just forget you even played fantasy football. You know what I mean? It's all off season. It's becoming a new trend because it's probably going to be the standard in 5 years, to be honest with you, because people love having, their entire team. You get to keep your entire team for years and years and years. And it's a lot more planning.
You have a bad draft though.
Right. So it's like, it's fun, but it's hard. And it's not easy because every decision you make, it's not just for that moment. It's for the next 5 years of your Dynasty League. You know what I mean? So it takes a lot more work. I thought about it for our league, but I like redraft and I like drafting. I like redraft and I like drafting. That's what this whole podcast is really about is redraft. We talk a little bit about Dynasty in some points, but it's not really, we're a redraft podcast. So, but I like the idea of sitting down with a group of people and drafting, putting the stickers on the board and all. You still draft in Dynasty, you still do that, but I feel like redrafting your team every year is just more fun because you get to do, everyone just resets their teams and everyone gets a shot the next year and all that stuff. So it's a different beast. It's not any easier or harder than Dynasty. Dynasty just takes more work, really. It just, you have to scout. People just go into Dynasty drafts and draft random guys because they don't know what their name is. So it takes time.
Yeah. That's
the biggest thing with Dynasty. So just take that into account. I'm not really going to advise you on which one you want to go to because it's personal preference. Switching an entire league to Dynasty is difficult because a lot of people will probably want to keep their team. So I would just say if you're going to switch your entire home league or, competitive league to Dynasty, I would say just do an entire redraft, as if you were a startup Dynasty league and go from there. But if you're in the process of starting a league, then that's something you have to take into account. Do the people in your league want to pay attention to college football? Do they like college football? Do they continue to listen to college football on a regular basis? Do they like to scout players? Are they going to be invested in the league? That's the hardest part. So many people don't have, there are certain people in your league that just aren't invested. You know who they are. If you have non-invested players in a Dynasty league, it's just going to be really annoying. But it's fun because you get to spend the whole year planning your team and make stupid trades in the middle of the offseason and then find out that player is a starter week one. And it's interesting. Yeah. But anyway, let's move on to number 6, allowing keepers. Should you, in your leagues, should you allow keepers? If you don't know what a keeper is, I'll say that really fast, and then Rick, you can give your thoughts on keepers. Sure. So essentially what a keeper is it's basically a player you get to keep, or basically what it is you get to keep one player or 2 players or 3 players, whatever the settings are for your league. You get to keep a player from your previous year. So like this year I drafted Ezekiel Elliott. And if I said, hey, I want to draft, I want to keep Ezekiel Elliott for my team this year, then you would keep that one player. Like I said, sometimes it's 2.
You could lose your first round pick, right?
Right. Yes. So
you took him in the first round.
Basically what you sacrifice for that is a pick, or, some leagues is different, but for most leagues that do keepers, that's what it is. You sacrifice the pick that you took that player in the previous year. So if you said, okay, I want to keep Zeke, and you drafted him with the 3rd overall pick, then you would essentially have to forfeit your first round pick to keep Zeke. So the strategy behind it would be if you drafted, like I drafted Chris Godwin in the 6th round. If I say, okay, I'm going to keep Chris Godwin, right? I keep him the next year on that 6th round value. So that's essentially how keepers works. I've always been intrigued by keepers. I haven't been in many leagues with them. I know a lot of leagues do it. At first, when I first heard of keepers, I was like, wait a minute. What happens to the draft? Like after you keep all your players, what's the consequence? You know what I mean? Like you just keep a player and then you draft based on everything.
That's what I thought.
That's what I thought it was. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's limits too. You can limit the amount of years that you can keep a player in a row and stuff like that. So, it just changes how it goes. But do you think we should, allow keepers in fantasy leagues?
So my personal view on it, I think this is another one that really depends on your opinion. There's no really right or wrong answer for this. But me personally, I would say no, just because I like the aspect of completely drafting my team and having a new fresh start every year and new fresh players. I think in some aspects it would be cool. Like if you drafted, like the year I drafted Patrick Mahomes in the their 12th round or whatever
for 12th round value.
Right, exactly. Like I thought, like that would be awesome. Yeah. People who drafted Lamar Jackson this past year could keep Lamar Jackson, who took him in like the 13th, 14th round. So sometimes it would be an awesome benefit for you. Yeah. But then other times, like this past year for me, like I was looking over and thinking like players on my team who I'd keep, and I'd be like, anyone worth value of keeping would be worth a first or second round pick, and it's like, to me, there's no point in doing that. So, sometimes it would help you out. Sometimes it would kind of just, not really worth it. But overall, this one really depends on just if you would want to, if you like the idea of keeping a certain player from your previous team and bring him over to your next team. Me personally, I like the idea of drafting and restarting every year and kind of building my own team each year, which is why I love redrafts. Anyway,
it's almost like Dynasty League light.
It takes a little part of Dynasty into, which is cool. Again, I think it's cool. It's just me personally, it's not really my thing.
It's a different strategy. It's a much smaller group. I don't think it'll ever be standard in fantasy football. It was very popular before Dynasty became a huge thing to do that. And a lot of fantasy leagues that I see still do keepers. And so that's, whatever really floats your boat. It's not really, a right or wrong answer. Personally, like I said, I'd rather do redraft, but I like the strategy of pulling keepers in because, you get to decide a lot of the time when the season comes around, people start asking the question, they ask us questions on Twitter. They're like, hey, should I keep this player over this player? I drafted this guy in the 5th round and this guy in the 8th round. Which guy should I keep? And so they're trying to make a decision on who they should keep. So there's a lot of strategy involved. So it adds an interesting aspect to it, but it's never something that we've considered in our home league at least. So let's talk about number 7, 10-team, 12-team, maybe more. What is your favorite amount of teams that you want in your league?
For me, another one that really depends. We do 10-team league. I think the best one is probably 12-team.
Expanding to 12 though. Finally.
Are we? So that's news to me.
Yeah. We'd have to vote on it. I hate voting.
Yeah, the vote's probably going to go back to 10.
Gross.
I think the best one's probably 12 just because it adds more teams to trade with. There's not too many teams where you're like taking, some rant like Julio Jones with your first round pick.
Yeah.
Like at 14th overall. Like I think that's kind of But 12 team I think is a happy medium between the 14 and 10. There's enough teams where you can, like I said, trade with. There's a good amount of teams where you can bid with. There's, not too many teams where you can't get good players at late values, but there's also not like there's enough teams where you can you won't see like a really good player in the waiver wire all the time, so it's sort of that happy medium. Right. I don't mind 10-team though too, because that's what we've always done, but again I think this is all this one is another preference one where if you have 12 people that you want to play fantasy football with, just do 12 people. If you have 14 people that you want to play fantasy football with, do 14 people. Yeah. If you have just 8 people, then just do an 18 league.
Just do an 18 league, yeah. Yep. I'm going to say, just for me, I'll agree with you, 12-team. 10-team is fine. I think 14 and 16-team leagues is getting a little out of control.
Yeah, that's...
Try to hold it to 12 people.
Unless it's a dynasty. I think a dynasty, like 14 or 16 is...
Yeah, that's fine. But I think... I think 12 for me 12 is the max that I'll join. Sure. I can't holding together. If you're a commissioner, holding together 10 teams is hard enough. But trying to hold together 14 to 16 teams is just absurd. So 12 team is kind of where I like to be. It's not really, like I said, it's all about personal preference. Like Rick said, if you can't get a league together, I mean, our league, I think it was 15 years ago. I might be wrong about that, 10 years ago. But when we started our league, we didn't have enough people to do it. So we started with 6. And then next year expanded to 8, and then the following year expanded to 12. And since then, we've just held at 12. But we're thinking about expanding to 12. But last year, I was in like 5 12-team leagues. So it's like, it's a different kind of aspect because it completely changes the way you draft. In 10-team leagues, when you get to the 15th round, there are guys on the board that would not be on the board in the 15th round in 12-team. You're talking about guys in the 15th round and 12 team are usually on the board in the 13th round. So it makes the leagues much deeper. It makes, drafting much, I guess, more difficult. There is more people to trade with. So it's a lot more fun with 12 teams than I say with 10 teams. But I think, it's like personal preference once again, but I would suggest 12 teams. Sorry, I was going to say 10. Wow. But anyway, let's move on to number 8. Kickers and defenses. The debate of the last 5 years in fantasy football has been whether you should kick kickers and kick defenses out of the league. So here are my thoughts. I'm going to say this really, really quickly.
Go ahead.
Because I've talked about it before. I don't mind defenses. Defenses are a lot more predictable than kickers are. Kickers are just at random. Kickers, for fantasy football, for me, I like to do research. I like to predict. I know I'm going to be wrong. I know there's times where I'm just going to be flat out look like an idiot, like saying Derrick Henry was going to be a bust last year, right? And that's going to happen. But I take the knowledge that I have and the predictive skills that I have and try to make an accurate, prediction on a player, right? For kickers, you can't do that. I don't care what team it is. Like, I've tried everything. I've literally tried everything. I've tried to look at over-unders on Vegas lines just to see if, maybe if a team's scoring more, a kicker possibly scores more fantasy points. I've looked at teams who are playing against defenses that tend to give up a lot of field goals, and maybe the guy will have a good week after that. It's just random. It honestly is just random. And unless you have like one of the 2 best kickers that particular year, you're just going to be aimlessly looking for a kicker to get you more than 8 points. And I think it's, a lot of people try to make predictions on kickers. It just doesn't work. So I'm with keeping defenses. I think defenses are necessary to, if you're not IDP, defenses are necessary to keep your, I guess, overall scoring intact. But I think for kickers, they have no place in fantasy football, and I don't know why they're in the league, to be honest with you. I don't know.
Okay, so
I feel like it's a way. I've lost championships. I've lost championships and different things to kickers, and I'm sick of it.
You've lost games because of kickers. I have not. So my personal view of it is I don't really care too much, and I would play with or without. Like, it doesn't really affect me too much. However, if I was to choose, I would keep them because I've played with them my whole life. I enjoy playing, like having a kicker, like, oh, please kick a field goal. I kind of enjoy watching that. I like defenses too. And it's just a personal thing, right? It's something that I in my head, it's a part of fantasy football. So getting rid of kickers and defenses for me would kind of, take away a little bit of that. I understand why you would want to get rid of kickers, especially not more. You said you would keep defenses.
Yeah.
So, but I understand why you would want to get rid of kickers. It's kind of dumb how a kicker can just get like 10 points
and then ruin my life,
0, and then get 20. Like, and it's all very random. Yeah, and like, of course, it happens to you and helps you lose games. But sometimes it can go the other way, dude. Sometimes you can have a kicker that you're not as good of a team, and you're losing by like 15 points, and your kicker gets 16 on a Monday night game. Like, it can happen, but it can happen for you, not just against you. So,
yeah. I've had it happen for me, and I'm still against kickers. So
yeah, no, I mean, I get why you would be against kickers.
Yeah, it's not.
I like watching. Like, when I'm watching football games, I like rooting for
kickers,
them to kick a field goal, or rooting for them to kick the extra point.
That's gross.
I know, it's just how I've grown up, though. It's just how.
Anyway, let's move to number 9. should you add a super flex spot? Now, a lot of people, if you don't know what super flex is, essentially it's a flex spot that's not restricted to running back and wide receiver only. So you can have a tight end in it if you want. You can have a kicker in it if you want. You can have a defense in it if you want.
Quarterback.
That's not a good strategy, but and a quarterback, which a lot of times the common consensus is you use quarterbacks in super flex spots. You don't have to. Yeah. But a lot of times it's the
smart thing to do.
It's a smart. So people started Superflex, and then they noticed that everyone's just throwing quarterbacks in that slot. So that's where basically it's not where two quarterback leagues came from, but it kind of is a spin off of that a little bit. But Superflex, basically anyone can go in that spot, and you can choose whichever player you want to throw in there. So should you add a Superflex spot?
I kind of like the Superflex, actually.
Yeah. Changes the entire draft.
That's the problem.
When we give you draft strategy, we're mostly talking about like a team without a league without a Superflex spot. So keep that in mind.
Just a regular flex. I don't mind Superflex at all. It's one of those things where, again, it's a preference thing. But I'm a big quarterback person. I love quarterbacks, and not just fantasy football, but the real NFL. I love watching quarterbacks. So having a 2-quarterback league in general, I like. So having a super flex spot, I like as well. Just having 2 quarterbacks to start. But at the same time, I think it can backfire too, because if you don't have 2 good quarterbacks, you're going to be at a disadvantage. And that's not always your fault, like the way the draft goes. And you can put a tight end in your super flex spot, and it's an instant like major disadvantage. While regular flex, running back, receivers, everybody has good and bad running backs and receivers. It's more fair.
Yeah,
I think in some degrees, but then again, maybe that's the strategy you play with. With Superflex, you have to draft 2 good quarterbacks. So it does change. It does definitely change the league. I wouldn't mind doing it. I also wouldn't mind not doing it. It's a preference thing. If I had to choose, I'd probably say leave it as running back and receiver, but it's definitely something that I would be interested in doing. And if that's what
if you're going to add a super flex spot, you might as well just go 2 quarterback and keep regular flex. Or restrict it to no quarterback and just have it be tight end, running back, wide receiver. Yep. But like, to me, that just doesn't make any sense, because unless you have Travis Kelce on your team, you're not going to have a guy that plays like a wide receiver in fantasy football at tight end. So it's like, I feel like if you're going to have a super flex, you might as well just jump to 2 quarterback anyway.
Yeah.
So, anyway, let's move on to the final one, number 10, 4-point or 6-point touchdowns for QBs. Now, a lot of people, you might be listening to this podcast if you made it this far and you're like, there's 6-point touchdowns for quarterbacks. Yes, there is. The premise behind this is very similar to the PPR format that people created years ago, and it's to balance out, to make the quarterback position as valuable, because right now I can jump into a fantasy league and stream a quarterback totally successfully in a 4-point fantasy point league. But quarterbacks in the NFL are a little bit more valuable than that, right? So what the goal of this is to make the quarterback position just as valuable as running backs, as wide receivers, as tight ends, so that they get drafted a little bit higher and that their value matches, those players. And people feel like it's a little bit better because, the quarterback position in fantasy football is very undervalued in terms of, like, people overvalue it if they don't know what they're doing. But if you know what you're doing, it's easy to find a quarterback in the late rounds. It's easy to find a quarterback on the waiver wire, especially at 4-point touchdowns. So should you switch to 6-point touchdowns if you're in a 4-point touchdown league, or should you just leave it at 4 points?
Again, preference, but for me, I love 6-point touchdown. I do. Again, but this goes back to what I was just saying. I'm a big quarterback guy. So if fantasy football revolves around quarterbacks, I'm a big fan of it. So having a 6-point touchdown changes a lot of things, because a guy who throws a lot of touchdowns, like a Patrick Mahomes or, a Dak Prescott or anyone who throws a lot of touchdown passes, their value goes much higher up. And like you said, it now justifies them taking a quarterback early in redrafts. So I actually do like 6-point touchdown leagues, but I'll play with the 4-point league. I'll play with the 6-point league. It doesn't really matter too much to me, but I do like the idea of 6-point touchdowns because I'm a big quarterback fan.
Yeah. I'm not going to disagree with you. I like the flexibility to draft a quarterback late.
Sure. And
I'm torn on the 6-point touchdowns. Like, it's a fun league to be in, I'll tell you that much, but it's less popular. I think making the quarterback position that powerful automatically makes it like your first and second rounds in 6-point touchdown drafts are going to be filled with quarterbacks. And that's gross to me, but I feel like it just makes them just as powerful as running backs and wide receivers and tight ends. And I think quarterbacks already score enough fantasy points as is. You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason to add 2 more points per touchdown.
Sure.
But if you're in that, if you're in a 6-point touchdown league, all of the advice we give you about quarterbacks, drafting them late and doing all that stuff, that it completely goes by the wayside because like I said, way more powerful than in regular leagues. So I like to stick to 4-point generally because I feel like it gives you more flexibility to do things instead of having to worry about 4 or 5 positions that if you don't like, if in a 6-point touchdown league, if you don't have a quarterback, you're screwed essentially because that guy's going to go out there. If you have Patrick Mahomes and he throws 5 touchdowns and 250 yards in one game, you're toast.
Yep.
It's 30 fantasy points just on freaking touchdowns. So it's a little bit much, but I think it's an overcompensation. Our league actually does 5 points for touchdowns. So everything in fantasy football is completely customizable. So if there's no generally the common consensus is 4-point and 6-point touchdowns. But 5-point touchdowns is not. You can do 7-point touchdowns. You go 3-point touchdowns for quarterbacks. You can do whatever you want, to be honest with you. Yeah. But I think these are the common 2 that people usually have in our league. We're 5-point touchdowns, but
I love the 5-point.
Yeah, I think it's a happy medium between the 2. But what I noticed in fantasy leagues that have the 6-point touchdowns is that, like I said, the quarterbacks become more powerful. But I think it's about 75% of the time I calculated in one league I was in last year with 6-point touchdowns, 75% of the time, the team with the highest scoring quarterback won.
Yeah.
And it's just because 6-point touchdowns makes it that much more lopsided for the quarterback position. So that's kind of why I don't like it, is that it just for me, I like the balance, that's why I like half PPR, because you balance quarterbacks and running backs. It's why I like, keeping it to, one quarterback, not having a super flex spot. There's leagues for that. If I want super flex, I'll join a different league. There's no real reason for me to be like, oh, I want my league to do this. There are certain things I want our league to do, but you know what I mean? If it doesn't happen, I still like the league. It's not a big deal. You know what I mean? Right. I'll go other places to share my love of fantasy football. But anyway, so that is the 10th point. Do you have anything else on that point, or?
I think that's pretty much it.
Okay.
I like the 5-point. It's probably my favorite one.
Yeah. He's like, I like 5 points. Not even on the list.
I know. The one in between.
Yeah.
The one that we do.
That'll do it for the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any thoughts, leave them in the comments on YouTube. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And we'll talk to you on Tuesday, Fantasy Champs. Got a long week to go.
Later.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.